Black Myth Wukong is a PS2 game. Released in August 2024 by Chinese developer Game Science, Black Myth Wukong really saw a huge surge in popularity upon its release. And this really came to a surprise to a lot of people because Game Science is not a really known developer, especially with Western audiences. And what's even more surprising to me is that Game Science doesn't really have any experience in games like Black Myth Wukong because all their previous titles are in the mobile industry. Additionally, I think it's surprising that this game really took off the way it did because leading up in anticipation of the release of this game, I didn't really see any marketing. I'm in the US, so I don't know what the marketing was like elsewhere, but man, I heard about the game through a Discord chat, so I never really saw myself playing this and just thought it would go under the radar. But man, when it took off, I was like, hell, let's give it a shot. And I'd say, ironically, for this video, I was only playing Jack and Daxter like 2 weeks before Black Myth Wukong released. But Black Myth Wukong being a PS2 game didn't really click with me until I saw a tweet by this account named Pio. The tweet in question states, Black Myth Wukong feels like a PS2 game that came out in today's age, and I mean that in the best way possible. He further states in a reply, like it's just a game that tries to be a game and nothing more. Reminds me of PS2 for whatever reason. And, as I think about that tweet, I just thought back to my playthrough of Jack and Daxter, and I think what makes it similar to being a PS2 game is that Black Myth Wukong feels like an aggressive focus on gameplay. And so thinking back to my Jack and Daxter playthrough, I was like, the concept of Black Myth Wukong is relatively simple. With Jack and Daxter, the objective was to go through the levels, defeat enemies, do a mini boss or boss at the end of the levels, and collect as many precursor orbs as you can. And in Black Myth Wukong, the objective is to go through the levels, beat up enemies, do mini bosses, and at the end of each level, there is a boss. Now, simplicity doesn't mean necessarily that the game's easy. It can mean that, but I think it really means that the concept of the game is easy. Black Myth Wukong's not really easy by any means. I never played a Souls game in my life. And so jumping into a game that I've heard is Souls-like was something that's definitely out of my comfort zone when it comes to gaming. I have always been an FPS shooter kind of guy. And so this was definitely different. And honestly, through the first part of the game, it was pretty brutal getting through it. I was stuck on bosses for a couple of days. I mean, I was getting killed. And honestly, frankly, I think I'm a pretty good gamer. So that was an adjustment, but I think that's what makes the game rewarding is when you finally do beat that boss, there is a sense of achievement. And I think there's a lot of that missing in today's games. And I don't know about y'all, but when you collect a power cell in Jack and Daxter, that cutscene, it just feels so good. And you feel like you're really progressing through the game and it feels rewarding. And I think defeating bosses in Black Myth Wukong makes you feel in a similar way. It feels very rewarding and feels like you're progressing through the game and really accomplishing something. And so to really drive this point home, the reason why Black Myth Wukong is a PS2 game, or at least feels like it, is it is focused on gameplay, and that's the bottom line. And I don't know about y'all, but I think with this generation of gaming, and as well as the last generation with the PS4 and the Xbox One, didn't really seem like there was a focus on gameplay, and it seems like we've lost those games that used to be defined as a AAA game. Those SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, and I know they made a remaster of that recently, which I think is great. Or, those games that are just kind of fun. You don't really know what's going on. You don't really care about the story. You're just kind of running around Bikini Bottom, jumping around, playing the game, having fun. I mean, isn't that the point of video games? And so it just seems to me that ever since we got into these last two generations, the companies making games have not focused on the gameplay. They focused on other things. And I think it can go into two different routes that I want to break down for you guys. And so the first category would be that the game was made to be a multiplayer game primarily. They had an aggressive focus on the multiplayer and then added on a single player aspect to it to either appease the fans or really just to be an introduction to the game. It's not the core gameplay of the game. You're not playing the game to play the single player aspect of the game. You're playing the game to get into the multiplayer. So I think the perfect example for this category is Halo Infinite. It seems pretty evident to me, having played the Halo Infinite multiplayer and then played the campaign after, that the focus of the developers, the focus of the gameplay, and this is pure speculation, obviously I don't know, but it just seems like in the product that they produced, that Halo Infinite was made to be a multiplayer game. The campaign was likely fan service, right? They knew they'd get killed if they released without a campaign, and so they did. And that might sound pretty harsh to Halo Infinite's campaign, but I promise you, I'm not a hater of it at all. I think it was actually pretty cool, and I thought they did some things that are unique and cool and fun to play, especially with the boss system where each boss has an upgraded version of a weapon. I thought that was actually a great idea, and I thought it fit in well with how the open world was mapped out, how you went about the map. I thought it was really, really a good thing, and I thought it had a lot of promise, and they're on the right track, if that makes any sense. And the second category would be that the game is made to be a complete focus on the single-player experience. Now, games that come to mind when I think of this category are games like Black Myth Wukong. I think that it fits well into a lot of the other huge titles that we've seen that have been single-player focused in recent years. And I think Black Myth Wukong fits well into this category where there is a focus on the single-player aspect. However, it's similar in a way to other single-player games that have released in recent years, such as God of War 2018, Cyberpunk 2077, Horizon Zero Dawn. However, what I think sets Black Myth Wukong apart is Black Myth Wukong doesn't really focus on the story or the plot or like the backgrounds of the villains, the massive lore. It's a lot about just beating the bosses and going through the game and going through the gameplay and understanding like each chapter is a different experience. Now there are different like in between chapters there are little storyboards that you can go and click, but there's not like a huge amount of information in Black Myth Wukong about the background of what happened, right? Whereas like if you play Fallout, you could go to the computer and see like little mysterious notes about what happened in the past before the bombs dropped, or what was going on with a raider camp in the past, right? But in Black Myth Wukong, there's really none of that. You have some of that, but it's not like a huge focus of the game. And that's kind of what my point is with this video, is that I think in the PS2 era, you also did not really have that. You didn't really have like the deep lore stuff, at least as a majority of the games. I think there were games that existed back then that did have that, but I think like if you're talking about like the volume of games that have that, I don't think there was a lot. At least that was my experience. And with the games that we have today, like God of War 2018, Horizon Zero Dawn, Cyberpunk 2077, I think there's just like a huge amount of like story focus building the world. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That is actually a great thing. I think it's great, and I love those games for different reasons, right? And I love the gameplay in those games as well. I'm just saying, like, I appreciate kind of like the boldness of Black Myth Wukong to just say, hey, we're just going to make a fun freaking game, and that's it. We don't have to have the most compelling story ever. We're just going to build something fun, and we hope that the audience likes that. And I think that's what I appreciated about this game. And when it turned out to be fun, I just couldn't put it down. And so what I want to start doing on this channel is just do a little bit of reviews. And I don't know if they'll be as long as this video, but I did want to make the point about how Black Myth Wukong felt. But with the review, I'm going to do 5 criterias. The first one will be the gameplay, or the feeling of the game. The second will be the variety. The third will be the story. The fourth will be the progression. And the fifth will just be the overall fun. And how it works is I'll just give a grade for each section, and then I'll average it up at the end and give an overall score. And hopefully that will help me give the best objective value I can to a game. But I do think that these ratings are very subjective, and honestly, a lot depends on what you're looking for in a game. So I do think I should make that caveat before we start this ranking system. So when we talk about our first category, which is gameplay, I think the most important aspect of the gameplay to me is the movement. I think games that have great movement mechanics are my favorite games. And what comes to mind are games like Apex Legends, which has fantastic movement, Titanfall 2, which was made by Respawn, who made Apex Legends. That they have great movement in that game. And honestly, Black Ops 3 had good movement too. Not as good as Titanfall 2, but you could see the similarities between them. I love that game as well. And I know that's a hot take. Now, games that I think don't have good movement and it's kind of clunky and annoying, Rainbow Six Siege is that game for me. And I know a lot of people love Rainbow Six Siege, and I understand why they like it. And a lot of people will say, well, it's kind of clunky because it's a tactical shooter. You know, that's the whole point of the game. But see, those kind of games are just not for me. So I don't think I'd ever rate a game like that. But with Black Myth Wukong, I feel like the movement and all that was very fluid. And it was a game that really does, I would say, is up my alley when it comes to gameplay. It's fluid, it's fast. It adds a lot of different aspects like the transformations, the sparks, the stances. There's a lot of different things you can do with the gameplay. And honestly, all these will add up in how you're going to strategize and fight your bosses. And so the bosses is the next thing I want to talk about with the gameplay. It really just made you feel like you're achieving something in the game. And it felt like you were actually, you yourself, the player, was getting better as the game went on. I do think the final boss in the game was significantly more difficult than some of the other bosses in the game. And I do think the yellow long boss was also one of the hardest in the game as well as the one at the end of Chapter 2. So there's 3 bosses that really I was stuck on for a long time. But the rest of the bosses, I think they got a lot easier as time went on. And I think it's just because I got better. Not necessarily my character was upgraded in the sparks. I actually feel like I myself was able to dodge and attack more efficiently as the game went on. And I think that's something that is distinguishable from other games, because I feel like these other games I've played, I don't really feel like myself, the player, is getting better. I feel like my character is just getting stronger, and I'm starting to just rip through enemies. To be honest, Ghost of Tsushima kind of felt that way to me. I felt like my character at the end was just OP as hell. And a little bit the same with God of War 2018. Now, I think that's still fun. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I did appreciate how in Black Myth Wukong I actually had to get better, not necessarily my player had to get better. So I thought that was actually a good part of the gameplay. And I think there's a little aspect of progression baked in there too. And I think these 2 categories are related in a way. They're siblings. But I don't think that it's substantial enough to go into the progression category. So that's why I wanted to mention it here in gameplay. One last thing I want to talk about with the gameplay is in Chapter 6, there's a whole new thing added where you can fly around on this cloud. And I thought that was a really cool and not unique, but really cool added aspect to this level. Each level acted as a different, gave you a different vibe pretty much. And I'm going to talk about that in variety and progression and all that. But just to touch on it a little bit here is, yeah, you get this cloud and it's really fun because you could just fly around, explore the level, you could land, fight enemies, take off from the cloud again, and just, I don't know, I thought it was really fun, I thought it was really cool. So I think that gives it a plus with the gameplay. And to really wrap up this category, I'd give it an A- overall. And I just really can't stress how much I had fun with this and just loved fighting, loved exploring, loved going through the levels, and I really look forward to playing it. So I'd give Black Myth Wukong an A- in this category. Now, I don't think the other categories are going to get as long as that one, because I do think the thing that makes Black Myth Wukong great is the gameplay. But there is variety too, and that's our second category. Each level has different enemies that you fight. They're usually in theme with what the level is. So, for example, the first level, you're in this forest biome and you're fighting wolf enemies. And then that's in stark contrast to the fourth level where you're in like a cave and you're fighting all these like creepy little insects, creatures, spiders, and you kind of get a vibe that it's like, oh, this is disgusting. I want to get out of here, you know? Whereas in the forest, you're like, okay, it's kind of a good intro to the game. It's not really anything crazy like outlandish like you would see in the fourth chapter, which is like wild. But there is good variety throughout the game, and that's really the point I'm trying to make. Not only in how each level looks, like each level is a different biome. The sixth level is kind of similar to the first one, but you're kind of getting towards the end there, so I kind of understand it. But yeah, each level has a different biome. Each biome has different enemies, and I think that makes for a really good variety in the game. After you finish each chapter, there's these really cool cutscenes and movies that I'm not going to show in this video. Just I think it would spoil it for you guys. I like the snow one the best. I thought that was really great. But when you play the game, there'll be these little movies after chapters, and I think they're really cool. Really, really cool. And it's just a cutscene. Like, you've seen it in other games before, but I thought the way they did it was really fascinating, really something I enjoyed. So in the variety section, I'd give this game an A, just with the cutscenes, the enemies, the levels, all of it. I think it's great. I enjoyed it, and it really kept you engaged with his journey to the West, which brings us to the story. The third category is the story. It's the journey to the West. It's the whole reason we're playing the game. Not really. I'd argue the reason we're playing the game is the gameplay, but the story kind of guides the character through the gameplay and like introduces the character through to new things to do. And I think that is ultimately should be the goal with any game and what makes a game fun. I think the story was all right. I'm not really familiar with Buddhist theology or any of these old Chinese myths, so it was foreign to me. But honestly, I didn't really care about the story that much. It wasn't confusing. There weren't any plot holes or anything like that, and it definitely didn't just present itself like in a way that makes you just so unbelievably confused where you would have to have known about these myths or stuff from the past, like before you played the game. It's very apparent from the beginning that you've been wronged in some way, and the celestial court is against you, and basically everyone you're fighting is trying to stop you to get to the West, to stop you on your journey. And so that simple plot, that simple thing that guides the game is good enough for me, right? I'm here to play the game that's fun, so I mean, I know I might get crucified for this opinion, but I think the story's just okay, and it's not just like completely out of the blue, completely out of the woodwork, just wild, like doesn't make any sense. I'm good with it, and I think for this, like, I'd give Black Myth Wukong a B. For me, a good story is like Red Dead Redemption 2, which is, I think, a masterpiece with this story. And so, obviously, I don't think this game has anywhere close to that, and I'd give it a B. So, yeah, Black Myth Wukong gets a B in the third category. So, the fourth category is progression. I think most in, like, modern gaming sphere would think that progression is like leveling up your character, prestiging, or like leveling up your weapons and making builds with your specific weapons. I think with single player games like Ghost of Tsushima and God of War that have like skill trees is kind of what progression looks like. And Black Myth Wukong has that, right? With the Spark system, it's basically points that you attribute to each kind of skill on the skill tree. You unlock different stances, you unlock whether your like critical strike chance increase, health increase, stamina increase. There's all of that kind of stuff within the game. And I know a lot of people love to create builds around that. And there's like a huge community of like trying to figure out which build's the best. and this happens in a bunch of games. Like in Warzone, I saw a bunch of videos about like the specific type of build of like an AK or a specific type of build of a gun in the game and like what you should do and like the strategies. And I think that's like cool for those people. But for me, I've never like been super involved in that. I'm like I played Apex Legends in the past, and I kind of like the simplicity of just going and getting a purple body shield, or just going and getting like a gun that's broken, like the Kraber, and just knowing that it's good, like just playing the game through that. But I do appreciate like people who love to get into the nitty gritty and do the builds, and I think that is important for games. So I do think that Black Myth Wukong having this a part of the game is important because I think their audience, like I said, I've heard it's a Souls-like game. I've never played Souls games before, but from what I've heard, they also do the build system, and so I think it would have been kind of a miss if they didn't added stuff like this. And so as I played the game, I did get more used to it and did start to figure out like which stuff was better than other things and like what I should focus on. Um, and especially like strategically placing sparks to beat specific bosses and then respecking and placing sparks elsewhere was important to defeat some bosses. So I think it gave you a lot of different routes and different methods and strategies to play the game. So it kind of does add on to the variety, which was our second category in a way, but I don't think it's very substantial to really move like the variety of the game. Like it's not incredibly noticeable to me. Maybe the stances is probably the most noticeable with the spark system, but as far as like uh, like having a whole new experience with the game, I don't think that really exists with the spark system, right? It's not like you chose like the NCR over the Caesar's Legion, or you're going down one path and you're locked out from another path, and you'll have to replay the game to go down the other path. It's not really like that. So I'd say like it's it's cool, it's fun, it's well thought out, it's positively correlated as you go through the game, and so I'd give it an A. And I think it's probably the best way you could do it for single player games. I personally don't put great weight onto this, but I do think it's important for other people to have some sort of progression within the game and to be rewarded as you play the game and go through. Now, I don't think it always has to be like a spark system or a skill tree. Like I said, like I mentioned Halo Combat Evolved earlier. As people may not notice, there is progression in that game. In the beginning, like when you're on the Pillar of Autumn, you're given a pistol, right? That's what you start out with. And you pick up a plasma rifle, then you pick up a plasma pistol or something, you know? You're introduced to weapons as you play the game. And then towards the end, you start to see rocket launchers and shotguns and all different kind of stuff. And that is progression in a way because as you go through the levels, there's more content added to you. There's more stuff going on. And I think that's also true for Black Myth Wukong because as you play the game, you're unlocking transformations, you're unlocking sparks, you're getting different abilities, different stances, all that. And so I think that makes the progression good. And I think that makes the progression an A. And so the fifth category is the overall fun category. I'm going to weight this category down when I do the final average because I think it's quite subjective and it just depends on the kind of games you're looking for and what kind of genre you're really into. Because I think if you're like someone who's in the FPS genre, in the third-person shooter genre, this might not be a game that you're really looking to play you're just not interested in it. You know, you probably wouldn't think it's fun. Now, I was pleasantly surprised that I thought it was fun being an FPS guy, but I think it is important to make that distinction and just to make that caveat before I make a grade. So to me, I'd say Black Myth Wukong is an A for fun, and I just never really had a moment where I was like dreading on playing this game. I always look forward to playing it, and I was always looking forward to see what the bosses in the game would just throw at me, what different twists there would be, what would happen, basically. And so I was enthralled with the game. I loved playing it, and there was never a time where I thought the game was a chore, which I do feel a lot in modern games. And so I think it deserves an A, and it gets an A in this category. So as you can see here, this really just rounds up everything I was talking about with the review. Um, the total comes out to an A minus, and I think that really does do the game justice for the amount of fun I really had with this game. I don't think this game is something that's like a masterpiece by any means. It's not even holds a candle to something like Red Dead Redemption 2, but it is something that I had a tremendous amount of fun with, and something that ultimately inspired me to make this video. And so I think that an A minus is a great place for this game to be, and I really look forward to seeing what Game Science does with this game going forward. I heard there's rumors of a DLC coming out, and I would love to see what they have cooking, and also look forward to see what they have cooking going on to the future and some of their other titles. I don't think I'll ever be on their mobile titles, but I do look forward to seeing what they will release in their you know in the games like Black Myth Wukong and getting into that kind of gaming space, not the mobile gaming space. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I really appreciate you guys. Follow me down below and subscribe. I attached Pio's link and account down below for you guys to follow him if you want, and I'll see you guys in the next one.